Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in Geography. We are going to start talking about Russia and then the independent republics that come out of especially the Soviet Union. We're going to start out with a kind of a quick introduction from Chapter 14, but this is, for my students, it's going to primarily focus on Chapter 15 in our textbooks. But let's look and take a look at what we're going to be able to do today. So the first thing we're going to be able to do, we're going to be able to contrast the economic goals and the benefits as well as those ideas of communism and capitalism. That's a big part of the transition in Russian history, especially as of late. We're also going to be able to identify and explain the economic importance of Russia's economic regions, what they are, what they look like, where they're located, and of course what they bring to the Russian economy. We're also going to be able to identify and explain the economic as well as the environmental challenges of Russia today, and particularly the transition from communism to capitalism, and also with the effects that the economy has on Russia and its people. All right, so here's that Chapter 14, brief introduction, just to kind of give us a sense of what Russia is like. So one of the things that we know about Russia is that it's the largest nation in the world by total area. It is massive. In fact, it's on 2 continents. The Ural Mountains kind of serve as our dividing line between those two, which would be Asia and Europe, and is often recognized as, again, that dividing line between the two. Russia is so massive. It has 11 time zones. Wow, that's a lot. Western Europe has mostly what we'd call a humid continental climate, whereas Eastern Europe tends to have those shorter and cooler summers and longer and more snowy winters, especially colder temperatures. And we'll get into Siberia a little bit later. There's little access to shipping ports, and transportation overland can be quite difficult. That being said, there are some ports that remain open year-round, but as you guessed, because of the latitude here, we are going to be dealing with a lot of ports that are covered in ice and therefore aren't going to be able to be utilized in the wintertime. As much as 75% of that population is located west of the Ural Mountains. So when we think about what continent that is, that would be Europe. And so we can see that a lot of that population lives on the European continental part of Russia. Siberia lies in the east, though, as well as the Urals. So they contain some of the coldest temperatures on Earth, and the permafrost that we find underneath that soil makes up about, in some cases, 40% of Russia. For those of you who have listened to our Canada videos, you might remember taiga. Taiga, in this case, is that pine that lives in particularly the tundra region of Russia, and it stretches about 4,000 miles east and west, and about 1,000 to 2,000 miles when we're talking north and south. And again, that is covered in pine when it comes to Russia. As far as our waterways, especially our inland water areas, we know that we have a border with the Black Sea in the southwest, and we also know that the Caspian Sea, which is saltwater, and is also the largest inland body of water in the world. Just to kind of give you an idea, the Great Lakes that form between the United States and Canada, there's more water in Lake Baikal, which again is our deepest freshwater lake, than there are in all those Great Lakes combined. So between the Caspian Sea and Lake Baikal, there's a lot of inland waterways here. And it's believed that Lake Baikal, and again, that's the one that has as much as the Great Lakes combined, holds about 20%, about 1/5 of the world's unfrozen fresh water. So it's really important. And then the Volga River is our longest river in Europe. This one's going to be really important for transportation as well as irrigation. We'll get more into that in a little bit. All right, here's a map just to kind of show you some of those geographic areas. This would be a good spot to pause the video and maybe take a look at these and make sure that you can locate them. But we're going to keep moving on. So let's talk first about that transition. So we know certainly with the history of the Soviet Union, that communism was at the focus of Russia. And we know that that came to a fall in the early 1990s. And we know that they have transitioned to a free enterprise system, which we also call capitalism. So let's start with those ideas. So when it comes to decision making in communism, that is done by the centralized government with the goal to help eliminate some of the disparity or inequality between the rich and the poor. And we'll talk more about that in the benefits here in just a second. Whereas with free enterprise, you might also hear it called free market, and we'll more often refer to it in this course as well as in this video as capitalism. That's when economic decisions are made by people. And the hope is in that system that people act in their own best interest. So when it comes to the benefits of both of these systems, coming back to communism, this is certainly where we see economic change happening quickly, with the idea again of creating more equality and trying to eliminate that economic disparity between people, essentially trying to create what we'd call a classless, at least economically, society. With capitalism, you're going to see a disparity between the rich and the poor, but the hope is that that creates competition, and that out of that competition comes better products at better prices because of the need to compete for buyers. And the hope is that those sellers will provide what the buyers demand. So in that transition, what economic problems have the Russians faced? Unemployment's been a big issue, as well as high prices. That's a big transition economically to make between those two systems. And so poverty has also become difficult. That being said, Russia certainly has made great strides, but at the same time, they are dealing with those economic issues. And a big part of that is that they went through a massive shift economically as well as politically. But we'll get more into that a little bit later. So with Russia's economic regions, let's start with Moscow. So Moscow is our largest city in Russia. It's also the capital now. Formerly, that was St. Petersburg. It's one of the manufacturing centers. It kind of shifted from heavy industry to more light industry and is starting to increase with more high-tech industry. It's also some where you'll find the farming. It's not, or the agriculture side of things, it's not the primary spot, but certainly it would have a little bit of that rich soil that we found in the breadbasket of Europe, which was the Ukraine. So you're going to find dairy, you'll find barley, oats, certainly potatoes, corn, and sugar beets will all be a part of that as well. And again, based on what we saw in Eastern Europe, it makes a lot of sense. When it comes to those port cities, Kaliningrad is ice-free. It's on the Baltic year-round. And so this one will prove, especially for the European portion of Russia, to be a very important market and important port city. St. Petersburg is closed in the winter because when we look at its location, it is latitude-wise, it's further north, and so ice is going to become an issue there. We mentioned earlier, this used to be the capital of Russia, and in many cases, it's still the cultural center of Russia. A lot of tourists will go to see St. Petersburg to get a sense of Russian culture. Murmansk is located in the far north, so we know with this one, again, important for connecting the northern parts of Russia, but we know it won't be accessible during the winter. Vladivostok is a busy port. It's located on the eastern coast of Russia, and it's also a hub for Russia's massive fishing industry, which also helps to feed a lot of people, particularly those who live in eastern Russia. All right, Siberia. This is the one that a lot of people have heard of. It has the largest supply of minerals in Russia. And so when we're thinking about that, mining is going to be really important here. You're going to see iron ore, uranium, which we know Russia has utilized in the process of making energy, and certainly during the Cold War, the manufacturing of nuclear weapons. You're going to see gold. You're going to see diamonds, certainly coal, oil. Natural gas is going to be a massive export, particularly to Eastern Europe for Russia as well. Lumber will also be very important. Harsh and cold winters really limit the access to these, and so Russia doesn't get to utilize those resources in Siberia like it would like to. When it comes to other economic regions, we certainly have the Volga as well as the Urals region. These are located between Moscow and Siberia. And the Volga provides a lot of energy, irrigation, transportation. We mentioned the Volga River, going to be very important. This is also where you're going to find the most productive farmland. That irrigation from the Volga makes that much more possible than in the area around Moscow. That being said, both are very important when it comes to agriculture. Certainly the Urals also very important for mining. You're going to see copper, gold, lead, nickel, and of course, bauxite. Now, with that economic activity, there is a hope to balance profits and protecting the natural environment. Siberia especially has a very unique environment, and therefore also biologically has some very unique animals, including those such as the Siberian tiger. The forests, when they are cut down, one of the struggles that Russia has been having is a lot of them are not being replaced, and that has led to more erosion and, of course, fewer trees. And we know that the Siberian forest, even though it probably doesn't get the recognition like a rainforest basin, especially like the Amazon, it is important for providing oxygen for our world, and therefore certainly is an environmental issue that Russia faces. Fertilizer overuse has certainly depleted a lot of the natural resources in the soil. The fear is that then leads to that leads to a reduction in yields and therefore producing less food. And then there's also certainly concern about a lack of maintenance in the nuclear power plants. That lack of maintenance and that lack of stability in their nuclear power plants was certainly found in the accident that happened in Chernobyl. And so that is certainly something that Russia will need to continue to address. Smog, certainly from that heavy industry as well as the coal-fired electrical plants, which still form an important part of the energy production in Russia, continue to be an issue. And water has been polluted due to the poor sewer systems that exist, the runoff from that fertilizer that we mentioned earlier, as well as industrial waste, and in some cases the improper disposal of those chemical weapons. So certainly some issues being dealt with in Russia. Highly encourage you here to look at some of these locations on the map. Again, this would be a great spot to pause for my learners as well as for my students to make sure that you're kind of giving yourself a sense of the geography. As always, I really appreciate you guys listening. For my students, I hope that you're following along with the guided notes to make sure that you're pulling out some really important information. As always, check out the check-in quiz to make sure that you're getting what you need out of this. Have fun with the challenge questions. Look back in the slides. They'll help you. As always, I really appreciate you guys listening. For my students, please reach out and ask any questions that you have. For those of you who are listening, I really appreciate it, and I hope that in some ways I'm kind of helping to promote maybe a little bit more geographic literacy. So thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time.